"Sir, she put something in your juice," said the little black boy to the millionaire. Edward Voss was not a man who feared many things. At 52, he had built an empire from nothing: real estate, tech patents, political lobbying. His name whispered in boardrooms and printed in financial magazines. His silver hair was always perfectly styled, his navy suits tailored like armor. He was known for being sharp, calculated, untouchable. That morning, he sat alone at an upscale cafe, nestled in the corner of an urban plaza. The air was crisp, the kind of early breeze that smelled like old money and fresh citrus. A tall glass of orange juice gleamed in front of him, catching the morning light. A deal worth $80 million was awaiting his final signature. Everything was under control, until a small voice cracked through the silence. "Sir, don't drink that." Edward blinked and looked up. A little black boy, no older than 6, stood beside his table. His shirt was faded and stained. His knees were dusty. His hands were pressed together, pleading. His eyes were wide, not with hunger, but something else entirely: fear. Edward glanced around, confused. "Excuse me?" The boy took a shaky breath and stepped closer. "Please, she put something in your juice." Edward stared at the child, unsure whether to laugh, panic, or call security. Was this a joke? Some scam? He looked around. The waitress, young woman, dark coat, red nails, was already walking briskly back toward the kitchen. "You mean her?" he asked. The boy nodded frantically. "She poured something from a bottle. She looked around first. I saw her do it." Edward's throat tightened. His instinct was to brush it off, but his eyes moved to the glass again. He hadn't taken a sip yet. The juice, moments ago so bright and refreshing, suddenly looked sinister, slightly too thick. Tiny bubbles near the rim. He didn't lift it. Instead, he stood up, fast and firm. The boy flinched. "It's okay," Edward said, voice softer. "You did the right thing." He reached into his coat, pulled out his phone, and called his assistant. "Tell building security to lock down the cafe, now." Within minutes, the scene exploded. Security guards appeared at the doors. Customers were confused. The woman who served the drink was already gone. Surveillance footage showed her leaving through the rear exit 2 minutes before the alert went out. Edward's untouched glass was taken to a lab. The boy was taken into a quiet office with Edward and 2 guards. "What's your name, kid?" Edward asked. The boy hesitated. "Zion." "Where are your parents?" "My mama's working. She cleans upstairs sometimes. She let me sit in the corner while she mopped the hallway. I saw the lady from the kitchen come out and pour something into your juice. She looked scared. Then she smiled real fake when she came out." Edward sat back, heart still pounding, the deal forgotten, the juice untouched. He studied the child, his clenched fists, his dirty fingernails, the fear that still lingered in his eyes. "You could have said nothing," Edward said. "Why tell me?" Zion looked down. "'Cause my mama says to always speak the truth, even if it scares you." The test results came back 3 hours later. Confirmed. Traces of antifreeze mixed with a sweetener compound. A slow-acting, clear, odorless poison. 1 sip wouldn't have killed him instantly, but over an hour or 2, it would have begun shutting down his kidneys. He might have collapsed on his flight out of town, or alone in his car, or hours later, too late to trace it back to a single glass of juice. Edward Voss, billionaire and self-proclaimed man in control, had come within inches of dying, without even realizing it. And he would have, if not for Zion. The woman, unidentified waitress, was a temp, hired only that week. No social media profiles. The ID she used was fake. By the time the authorities tracked the address she listed, the apartment was empty. Whoever she was, she'd planned well. Too well. Edward's world was built on controlling chaos. But now, chaos had knocked on his table, and a little boy from the shadows had stopped it. That evening, Edward called off all meetings. He returned to the cafe after it closed and asked to see the cleaning crew. Zion was there, holding his mother's hand. She was exhausted, wearing a janitor's jumpsuit, her face lined with quiet strength. When Edward approached, she immediately pulled Zion close. "Sir, I'm sorry if he bothered you." "He saved my life," Edward interrupted. His voice cracked for the first time in years. "He didn't bother me. He gave me back everything." The cameras showed up days later when the story hit the news. "Billionaire saved by homeless child's warning." Edward never corrected the headline. He didn't tell them Zion wasn't homeless, just forgotten by a system too busy to care. Because in his eyes, forgotten children were often the truest heroes. 3 days after the incident, Edward Voss sat in his office, staring out at the skyline. He had survived assassination attempts in boardrooms, political ambushes, even cyber attacks on his company. Yet the closest he ever came to death had been in broad daylight with a glass of juice in the most casual moment of his life. And it was a 6-year-old boy in a torn beige shirt who stopped it. Zion. Edward couldn't get his face out of his mind. The fear, the trembling hands, the fact that he could have just walked away and said nothing, yet didn't. "Because my mama says to always speak the truth." Those words echoed louder than the stock ticker running on his wall. By the following week, Edward had done what he did best: investigate. He learned that Zion's mother, Sarah Amani, worked part-time at multiple buildings, including the maintenance contract for his office tower. She cleaned bathrooms at night and boardrooms before sunrise. Her last permanent address had been a shelter, though they now stayed with another woman and her children in a cramped single room. Sarah had no criminal record, no requests, no favors. She had raised Zion with almost nothing, but had managed to give him everything that mattered. Edward did something uncharacteristic. He didn't send a lawyer. He showed up in person. They met at a small neighborhood cafe, far less glamorous than the one where the poison had been poured. Zion clutched a red plastic toy in one hand and leaned against his mother as Edward entered. Sarah stood up immediately. "Mr. Voss, we're sorry again. I never expected any of this." "You don't have to apologize," Edward said, sitting across from them. "I owe you my life. And your son." He looked at Zion, who blinked up at him shyly. "You saved me." Zion offered a timid smile. "I want to do something for you," Edward continued, "but not charity. I want to invest." Sarah hesitated. "In what?" "In your future," Edward said. "In his." That week, Edward arranged housing for Sarah and Zion. No cameras, no press release. A clean, safe apartment near a good school. He also set up a trust fund for Zion's education, ensuring he'd have options, something Edward never had as a child either. He didn't stop there. Edward launched a foundation under Zion's name, the Truth First Initiative. Its mission: to support children in underserved communities who display courage, honesty, or ethical action, especially in environments where speaking out is often dangerous or discouraged. The poisoning investigation remained open. Authorities discovered that Edward had recently voted against a corrupt zoning project tied to organized interests. They suspected the woman posing as a waitress had been hired as a silent hit, someone to disappear after the job was done. But what the planners hadn't counted on was the one person no one noticed, a barefoot little boy waiting quietly near a service door. 1 year later, Zion stood beside Edward at a private dinner event, not to be paraded, but to speak. He wore a simple white button-up and looked nervous in front of the guests. Edward leaned down. "Just be yourself." Zion nodded. Then he spoke into the mic. "I didn't do nothing special. I just saw something wrong, and I said it. My mama told me that the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always right." The room was silent. Then came a standing ovation. But Zion didn't bask in it. He looked up at Edward and whispered, "Can we go home now?" Edward smiled. "Of course." In the months that followed, Edward changed, too. He took fewer meetings. He visited schools his foundation funded. He started walking without bodyguards. For a man who once thought he had everything, it took nearly losing his life to see what he'd been missing: connection, purpose, legacy. Zion's story never faded, not because of Edward's fame, but because of what it reminded the world: that the smallest voice can interrupt the darkest intentions, that a glass of juice can hold death, and a child's truth can hold life. And in the end, it wasn't wealth or power that saved Edward Voss. It was the courage of a little black boy who simply chose to speak up. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more emotional, dramatic, and unexpected tales. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love hearing from all of you. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep watching.